Welcome back to Your Wise Self with Sara, the podcast where we slow down, tune in, and reconnect with the wisdom that's already living inside of us. If you have not heard of Your Wise Year, it is a year-long program with 11 incredible guides. Each month, we go somewhere very meaningful. And this month, we go deep into the inner landscape of the spiritual life with a guest who has spent more than 30 years helping people wake up to the sacred in everyday life. Scott McRae is a pastor, chaplain, spiritual director, coach, and educator who has walked along hundreds of people through some of life's most profound moments in hospitals, churches, one-on-one sessions, and in community, and much more. He's the co-founder of Sojourners Institute in Minneapolis, where he offers spiritual direction and trains others in this beautiful ancient art of deep spiritual guidance. He holds a Master of Divinity from Yale University, where, fun fact, he also met his wife, Melanie. Today, Scott is joining us to talk about something he calls the sacred map of clarity, a framework for understanding three distinct journeys we all move through: the journey of the ego, the soul, and the spirit. And here's what I love about his approach. He doesn't tell you to get rid of your ego. He says it might actually be your first teacher. If you've ever felt like you're searching for something that you can't quite name, more peace, more purpose, more you, this conversation is going to feel like a breath of fresh air. Scott, it's truly an honor to have you on Your Wise Self with Sara. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Sara. Great to be here. I've been looking forward to it.
I always enjoy and appreciate having conversations with you, so I'm going to certainly learn a few new things today.
Well, thank you. I hope so. I hope it's a conversation where I can learn from you as well. Yeah.
Let's just start at the beginning. Give us a little bit of background. How did your life weave its way into this work that you're doing with spiritual guidance?
It's a long and in many ways tangled journey that got me into the spiritual guidance work. I think from being a small child, I was sort of felt interested, and maybe too interested at times, in God and the sense of something more. The journey has taken me through sort of conventional forms, like being a pastor in a church and in a campus community. And then I've always had an unconventional side, and that started probably in high school and through college. And then I married a wonderfully unconventional woman and started in this pathway that has led to training. I went through an unconventional training program, and I've always been drawn to the edge in a lot of different ways. And I think spirit has led me to that edge, and I find that very life-giving. So the work of exploring the edge with other people is really work I've always loved in whatever context I've been working.
For someone who's never heard of spiritual direction, can you just paint a picture a little bit more about what that is and how a session might look?
Yeah, it is the form that most people have not heard of. I always want to just recognize that it is a kind of a new emerging form, even though it's an ancient form. But spiritual direction is really about following our inner natural urges to understand the bigger realities of our lives. The starting place for me is this quote from a Catholic priest and scientist, Teilhard de Chardin, where he says, "We are not humans having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." And so with that starting point that we are fundamentally spiritual beings, I believe there is a natural impulse in all of us to grow spiritually, to understand our life spiritually. And so spiritual direction as a discipline is about helping people uncover that, nurture that. And so sessions tend to be like a traditional therapy or a coaching session where you sit together for an hour. Typically it's one-on-one, but there also are group spiritual direction practices. And the spiritual director is just a companion in this process of discovery and offering suggestions. But really the belief is that we all have within us an inner guide, and it's helping people discover and listen to and respond out of that deeper inner wisdom. How did you describe this podcast? You used 3 descriptions at the beginning. What were they again? Tune in,
Slow down, tune in, and reconnect with the wisdom that's already inside of us.
Yes. Slow down, tune in, reconnect with the wisdom already inside of us. That is a beautiful description of what spiritual direction aims to do.
I love that. It's interesting how life happens, because you and I got connected a number of years ago now when I was at the University of Minnesota getting my master's degree in health coaching. And you were actually doing programming with the Enneagram, which we can talk about briefly as well today, just to help capture how that plays into all of this. But what you came into your wise year with was more of the spiritual direction and that work that you're doing. And I recently had the good fortune of going and having a day of self-renewal at the Franciscan Prairie Woods. It's a beautiful facility in Hiawatha, Iowa, and had the opportunity to have a spiritual direction session, and was so looking forward to it because I knew just a little bit from you and hadn't received my own guidance before. It was really very much like what you're talking about. It was very therapeutic because this person wanted to know what was going on in my life and what was just kind of top of mind for me at this point, but also reflecting back in how my whole life has kind of shaped who I am up to this day and this time, and seeking that self-renewal. It was such a great opportunity to really experience the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you had that window into it, because it is profound, and it's in many ways this combination of simple and profound. And it is a lot like therapy. It's a lot like coaching. But I think the difference is that it has this sort of trajectory toward understanding the bigger picture and placing our lives within this larger frame. And some people call that larger frame God, some people spirit, some people the higher self. It can be whatever the larger frame is for people. We function differently, and I think live in the world differently when we really have a sense that we're being held within and guided by this larger frame.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the thing too that really stuck out for me with my session, taking all the things that are happening in my life, and she was able to really tune in right into what it was that I needed. So she gave me a little bit of homework when I left that day. And what it was 5 minutes of silence. I said to myself, oh, I always have time alone. I always, get this space. But is it ever truly silent? And it isn't. I always have it in the AirPods. I'm listening to something. And so that's given me a focus. In fact, this last Sunday, I was cleaning and I resisted the urge to put on any music, put on any podcasts, and just allowed it to be quiet while I was doing the cleaning. And kind of with that thought in mind that's when spirit comes through. That's when you can hear your inner guidance, your inner wisdom. And otherwise, we have all this noise that just kind of cancels it out.
Right. We live in a culture that is remarkably noisy. One of the spiritual teachers, John O'Donohue, says we live in a neon world that's bright, that's fast, that's loud. And so that move into silence is a radical act. It really is a very countercultural act. And it's a beautiful example of the combination of simplicity and complexity that comes with the spiritual life. It's a complex shift for you and for me to enter into 5 minutes of silence. But it's actually a very simple thing to do when we create the conditions for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. It's about creating the conditions for sure. Mm-hmm. Though one of the things I would offer too, that just a little bit about myself that intrigues me about your work is I grew up Catholic and had a little bit of a resistance to it growing up
to put it lightly, perhaps.
Yeah, to put it lightly. Went to private school, kind of always felt like it was something that, and I think that's kind of my personality, as you know, from my Enneagram type. I'm an Enneagram 8. So I don't like being told what to do or what to feel or what to believe. And So I think that that's where it started very young for me, that it was difficult for me. Now, I found my way back to the church through various times in my life when I sought community and safety and needed that space of just being among people and being able to, commune with them, so to speak. But overall, and throughout my life, I've had different guides kind of tell me that I'm more of like a quilt. I kind of take a little bit of wisdom from this, a little bit of wisdom from that, and I piece it together and make it what feels the most resonant for myself. So when you're working with people, do they have to have some kind of certain spiritual or religious background to work with you?
No, to just kind of directly answer that, most people are coming out of the sort of the pattern that you described, where most of the people I see were raised in a traditional kind of religious context, and they found that that context became too small. Sometimes it was abusive. Sometimes it just felt sort of innocuous and not helpful. But all of the people I see are really, I think, moving toward this larger interfaith perspective. And in my previous work in chaplaincy, it was fascinating to see that shift, because early on in chaplaincy, most of the people were connected with the church, and what our function was prayer and maybe giving communion and different things like that. And over the 20 plus years I was in healthcare, we just saw that really shift. Fewer people were aligned with a spiritual tradition, or very few aligned with the church, and had wonderful conversations with atheists, for example. And I even have some clients who would identify as atheists. Um, and so there's a beautiful range that we're seeing: Buddhist, Hindu, Taoist, Sufi, Christian. And what we find as we engage the spiritual work more deeply, that these various strands of religion start becoming a one woven, beautiful thread. And that's what we're after.
Yeah, I love that. And it sounds like maybe that's been the evolution that's happened over time, is that maybe people were starting to initially meet with you coming from that traditional approach, and you're seeing just more and more of a little bit of a melting pot, if you will, of
Yeah.
different backgrounds and beliefs, and weaving together those different beliefs to create kind of what I was mentioning with myself with the quilt of just having it be what it is for me personally versus, having it be some organized religion. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Although I will also add that some people, after they sort of wander into the wilderness of the quilt, come back to their religion in a different way, but with a newfound conviction. I have some of those clients as well. And I've experienced a little bit of that in my own Lutheran tradition. So sometimes it takes people completely out, and sometimes it brings people back into their religious expression.
That's an interesting journey that you get to explore with people. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
is there anything else that you wanted to share about that evolution of the 30 years of work?
Well, I think if I had to identify a thread that ran through all of it, it would be my love for two things. One was my love for just the deep personal conversation. And that happened at every juncture of different sort of spiritual, different sort of contexts. People who were in loss, grief, baptisms, new beginnings, new life, death, all of that sort of stuff. I love the intensity of those one-on-one conversations. And then I also loved the collective, the small group. And so I got into education and did a lot of chaplaincy training, where we used a process of 5 students that were doing action and then coming back and reflecting. So that combination of small groups and one-on-one discovery have really been the thread that has woven through all of my ministry, and now leads to what I'm doing with individual work with clients. I'm doing the training program of spiritual directors, and I run an online spiritual community where I get that fix of a small community of people talking about really wonderful, important, at times difficult stuff. And maybe it's important just to say, we're in a world right now that's completely unraveling. And so the spiritual work is like a lifeline that many people are discovering, rediscovering as they're navigating this unraveling world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so needed right now. And I think that we can look back. I mean, we have the Harvard study of happiness to reflect back on 85 plus years of what it is that's important for people to be happy. And it's all about relationships and connection. And then we fast forward to 2020. We know what happened in 2020. And I know this has been part of the conversation that I've had so often lately is here we are even 6 years later and we're still recovering in a lot of ways and things have shifted and changed in how we connect and ways that we connect and having a home base like that to be able to go and share with community and feel that depth. Oftentimes we're in a world where we're moving in a fast pace and we do a lot of small talk. And so taking that opportunity or having that opportunity to deep dive is just, I'm sure, so moving for people. And you're creating that.
Yeah, and maybe just to kind of amplify that point by saying it's often the unravelings of our life that generate the expansions and the transformations of our lives. So death, divorce, loss of job, often these become catalysts for looking at our lives differently and living differently. And we see that individually, and we're also seeing that in our culture as death and the institutions are dying in so many different ways. I happen to be one who believes amidst all of the sort of wreckage that's unfolding, there are really exciting, amazing things emerging in our world. And I love that sort of abundance approach to what's unfolding, even though I don't for a moment want to minimize the loss and just sort of the wreckage that is unfolding.
Right, right. Well, and you just had the recent experiences of what was happening in Minneapolis, near
Yeah.
home base and all of that. So it really is impactful. And also what I'm hearing and following in the spirit world, and I follow a lot of astrology, which may play into some of that. I don't know what your belief is there, but it is interesting because they're talking about reflecting over our entire, lifetime and reflecting back. I mean, we've had things where we've grown and torn down, grown and turned down. And so it seems like we're in that phase right now of things tearing down and we know that it just has to rebuild. And every time the goal is for it to rebuild better and wiser. And I think that the thing that goes along for me personally too is I look at like that masculine, feminine energy. And so the tearing down is about kind of tearing down that structure to allow the flow of feminine to come in and allow that to move us forward in a different way.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm into all of this stuff, the astrology, the masculine, feminine, and was just reading this morning about in the centuries prior to Jesus, there was a transition of symbol from moon to sun, from the lunar to the solar. And the lunar is about soul, it's about depth, it's about the feminine. And sun is about the masculine, the bright, the upward. And we really came into a whole patriarchal, a couple of centuries with this movement into the solar realm. And now we're moving into a synthesis of the two, where the soul and the spirit are coming together. The sun and the moon, the feminine and the masculine are intertwining. And there's a third thing emerging in this world. That's pretty exciting. And astrologically, that's being reflected right now as we are in Aries and all the stuff, all the planets that have been coming into Aries, and it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, it is. We could talk about that for a whole another hour in and of itself
Yeah.
because I am always fascinated by that as well and appreciate that perspective because I think that we're at a point, and at least for me personally, I'm not going to necessarily speak for anyone else, but for me personally, the last year or so, I have been just looking for guidance and a piece of reassurance. And it's funny how astrology has given me a little bit of that. And I'm not saying that it's my full belief system or anything like that. Again, going back to my quilted patchwork of beliefs, but it has definitely given me a little bit of stability and understanding that this is okay. Like things are shifting, things are happening, and what we know to be true when we study anything Eastern philosophy oriented is that nothing's permanent and that everything's always in a state of change. It's just another reminder of that, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, and for me, astrology is a part of widening that frame of perspective. It places us into a cosmic, astrological kind of world where my stubbing my toe and burning my toast, all that stuff is infinitesimal by comparison of this massive evolution that's happening in the cosmos. And you and I are a part of that evolution of the cosmos. And that's really where I think spiritual work becomes so significant, is that it connects us to what I think of as a reciprocity, being in connection to this wider energy of love and light.
Yeah.
And we're being held by that, but we're also contributing to it.
Yeah.
For good and for ill, depending upon what's happening in our lives. So anyway, that larger frame is, I think, activated in part as we wake up to systems like astrology, the Enneagram. What's the other wonderful that you're into?
Oh, human design.
Human design. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what I'm just starting to dabble in. If we have 5 hours, we could go and meet with you.
Right. Well, that's maybe a good segue to just share a little bit about the background on the Enneagram and how that played into your learning and spiritual direction.
Well, the Enneagram was huge for me when I was first doing chaplaincy training. I was introduced to it back in 1996, 97. And I know you had Nian on last month, and she's a great teacher of the Enneagram and a friend of mine. And it's a great system for understanding the ego and for the ways that we get stuck, and also for the ways that we move toward wholeness and move toward this spiritual realm, because the Enneagram, when it's properly framed, is a spiritual system. And so I got introduced as a chaplain, and it really came alive for me because it made sense of the struggles that my wife and I always got into. Type 9, she's a type 4. And it just gave us language that really was so helpful. And then I started teaching the Enneagram to the students that were coming through the chaplaincy training. And then I started teaching it to the wider healthcare community, and ended up teaching it to over 1,000 healthcare leaders in my setting back in the day. So really found it to be helpful. And of course, we learn what we teach. And so I learned a thing or two about the Enneagram. And my wife and I still get into the same struggles, but we don't get dragged down so far by them because we have this tool, the Enneagram, to understand it.
Yeah. And to reiterate, because we did talk to Nian last month, and she's just such a wise, beautiful soul. But the Enneagram is really about more motivation over personality. So I think that's a good point maybe to make when you're talking about that, your relationship with your wife, and you're each being motivated by something.
Right.
It's super fascinating. I love the Enneagram, and I think that's such a great tool. And I think that it's very digestible for people to understand and to relate to and to use in their relationship work, professional work, and their personal life, all of the above. That also segues us into ego, soul, and spirit, and talking a little bit more in depth about the Masterclass. This framework you've developed is what you call a sacred map of clarity. And I think that it feels like it names something so many of us have sensed, but maybe don't have the words for. Can we explore that a little bit more?
Well, maybe I'll start with sort of the bigger motivation behind the way I have framed this. One of the key sources of spiritual confusion is the language. There's so many different ways we use language in spirituality. Soul and spirit get interchanged, and that's okay. That's understandable. But I think it becomes a tangle that actually becomes more confusing and creating of suffering than helpful. And so I have found that as I have teased apart these things for myself in my own spiritual life, and then also helped clients do the same, that the spirituality becomes more of a resource rather than a confusing hindrance. So that's why I've sorted out these three different strains of of experience. And I talk about the sacred map of clarity because I think the more clear we get around these three different channels, the more we experience life sacredly. And so I'll get to that. But I start with the ego, and we often talk about, don't be egotistical, and ego gets a really bad rap. And the ego is simply our understanding of our personality, and it tends to form between ages 4 and 6. And it's all about preferences. I like this, I don't like that. And we form a self that we try to control and predict reality by these preferences that we create. And that's very normal, and we need to do that. We need to develop in childhood an ego that really creates a sense of how I am in the world and who I am. And a lot of that comes from culture, from family around us. And some of it's driven by personality, which is where the Enneagram comes in. The Enneagram defines sort of egoic tendencies for each of the 9 types. And so it becomes a real helpful tool in decoding sort of our fundamental egoic motivations. And as we really study the ego, what we learn is that what I like to think of as a lower ego and a higher ego. And the lower ego is this reactive self that is protective, controlling, complying, performing in the world. It's at stake. It's fear-based. And there are emotions like shame and guilt and fear and anger that come out of that reactive space that have their purposes. But if we live there too long, it really is depleting. Mm-hmm. And right now, the sociologists are estimating that about 75% of our world are functioning primarily out of this lower ego consciousness. And so we see it in politics. It's all competitive. It's back and forth. There's a shift when we come into the healthy ego where we start to activate the healthy parts of our personality. And that shift is often described as the movement from anger into courage. And we start to activate healthy emotions of courage, acceptance, empathy, enthusiasm. And here our personalities start to flower. And the gift of healthy ego work on this level is a sense of agency that we can impact the direction of our lives. Rather than life happening to me, life can happen by me, to use that framework from Michael Bernard Beckwith. And really, the gift of coming into healthy ego is self-worth. It's the ability to love self, cherish self. And I think that's really where our human consciousness right now is inviting us to come into a healthy relationship with ourselves so that we care about ourselves, because that's when we can really start caring about other people. Mm-hmm. Love of self leading to love of others.
It's so helpful to break it down into those 2 levels of ego, with the lower and that higher. Kind of frequency is the word that comes to mind for me.
Very much so.
Yeah. And then how that is the self-worth related to that higher level. We just touched very briefly on human design, and just to bring that concept full circle with regard to what you're talking about is, in my human design chart, I am what is called an ego authority, which is funny because it feels very much like it plays into Enneagram, but I know other Enneagram 8s who have a totally different chart. So but it is interesting because the ego is just about truly my heart and my throat are connected in the chart, which means that I have to talk through the experiences, if I'm trying to make a decision, and just hear myself say it. And if my heart soars, if it feels very good in my body, then it's a yes, full body yes. If I start talking and I'm like, oh, this just doesn't sound right, no, scratch that, forget it. But when you tell people, like if I say, oh, I'm an ego authority decision maker, it sounds really negative, but it's really not. It's really about what, to your point of what this personality or persona inside of me that has developed obviously at an early age, that's helping me identify what is it that works best for me.
Yeah, and just talking about your throat and your heart, so much of this human growth and spiritual growth is about alignment. And I'll often use that sort of vertical alignment piece. And what we're aligning on the egoic level is body, heart, and mind, that three-centered connection. And of course, the Enneagram is oriented around 3 body types, 3 heart types, 3 mental types. So the Enneagram is really in service of this 3-centered coherence, where we bring into balance all 3 centers. And in our lower ego, we tend to be functioning out of one of the centers to the exclusion of the others. And balance is what creates the suffering and sort of the wreckage in the life around us. Maybe just to say, I think of the ego journey as about widening awareness. It's about becoming aware of our tendencies, being able to think about our thinking, have feelings about our feelings, being able to sense what's going on in our body. So we widen awareness and we come into a healthy relationship with ourselves, self-worth. And from that strength, we then have the ability or the inclination to do the second of these journeys, which I think of as the soul journey. Where the ego journey is about widening, the soul journey is about deepening. So I mentioned earlier how the soul is associated with the symbol of the moon, with the lunar realities. It's a darker reality. It has depth. I think of the soul as the gravity within us. And so the journey of moving into the soul is about the courage to go down into our wounds, into our losses, to the unfinished places in our lives. It's about releasing the attachments of our ego and descending into sort of the unconscious parts of our lives to the degree that we're able to do so. And the belief is that when we don't do this work, and we've all avoided it because it's hard work, we end up being sort of automatons. We're just sort of being driven by our unconscious inclinations. So we want to go through and start to unpack them. And the belief on the soul level is that we do that unpacking. It is a healing process. So if I, for example, I was a 9 and I am a 9 on the Enneagram, and I always had a sense that I should just sort of be invisible in the world. And as I unpacked, that was incongruent with another part of me that wanted to shine. I saw that I really struggled to possibly create any sort of disharmony in the world. Creating disapproval in others was terrifying to me. Where I imagined for you as a type 8, that wasn't such a big deal. That wasn't on your radar. It was really on my radar. So one of the ways that I became a more effective professional in healthcare was to start appreciating when I created disapproval. Oh, that must mean I'm functioning at a higher level. Yeah. That feeling freed up energy for me. It was like taking some baggage and just releasing its energy, and I became more effective. So that's an example of soul work in the world.
Yeah, I love it. And when you let that go, I would imagine also you got to see that the ramifications weren't really as bad as maybe what you would imagine them to be.
No. And so that's a really important point. So many of the fears that we have are projections that just don't bear out in reality.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's so true as an Enneagram 8. I mean, my mom and I have talked about this over the years because she's like, you don't mind what people think or, what you're doing. And I'm just like, no, I mean, definitely don't get me wrong. There's an element of my ego that worries about what people think, but for the most part, it is not my motivation.
No, it doesn't drive your behavior like it does for some of us. Let me just close the loop and talk about the third spirit journey. So I talk about the ego journey as widening awareness, the soul journey as deepening awareness, and the spirit journey as heightening awareness. So as we do this healing work, we are freed up energetically, and that descent turns into ascent. We have an upward lift. And that upward lift in our human experience is about we become more perceptive to the world around us. We start receiving what we often experience as sort of these aha moments. We're guided by higher knowing, higher forces. And some of us believe that might be angels, saints, and some people just believe it's really just freeing up our minds to be functioning at their optimal capacity. So in the spirit realm, as we develop that, we are in this process of receiving all kinds of new perception and activating new potentials within our human experience. And so that's the exciting stuff that I think we're seeing emerge in the world around us as spirituality is taking off like crazy around the globe through communities and through individual experiences. So
Yeah.
I love to explore with clients this edge that they're experiencing that's terribly exciting, where they're having these revelations come through that would block when they're in the ego. The ego would say, oh, you're making that up. That's your imagination. When we get into our spirit identity, that stuff really becomes the food for living. And so that's very exciting.
Yeah, it is. Well, and it's really being able to dive into truth, like what is true or versus what are we thinking or feeling, kind of, which can be making up stories along that way
Right.
too. So
Right.
yeah, soul deepening, ego widening, spirit heightening or ascending.
Yeah.
Great, beautiful way to paint that picture again for everybody to see all that and to feel that. I invited you to be a part of Your Wise Year because of the work you are doing. And it's so interesting because as these 11 different coaches and guides have converged together, it feels like there's a thread that's weaving through the whole year. And at the same time, bringing a lot of different topics and a lot of different levels of thinking or feeling to the whole year. We'd had the retreat in January, and then we have a monthly masterclass where we take a deeper dive into each of those topics. So your masterclass will be coming up on June 3rd. And so you'll spend an hour talking to the audience who have engaged and invested in Your Wise Year. Can you just share a little bit more about maybe what the person might walk away from that's listening to your masterclass?
I would hope that there would be some cognitive learning in the headspace around these three journeys, and I'll go into some more details about what marks each of them. And so there'll be some cognitive material. I hope there'll also be some heart material. I will share stories that are a part of these journeys, and I think so much of what's unfolding right now are people are activating a level of heart knowing that is really informing the mind rather than the mind informing the heart. And then I will offer a practice for each of these three different levels, and we'll probably just dabble in maybe a couple of these practices during the session because spirituality is maintained by practice. It takes practice like learning the violin. And so just offering some practices for people. So I hope it'll be a mix of cognitive, heart, and some actual practical application. And I'm just excited about community gatherings. I think at this time right now, people gathering around this kind of material is really the hope of the world. And I just think it's always fascinating to meet with people who are drawn to this sort of thing. So I'm very excited about it.
I feel like you and I could talk about all these levels for hours and hours because mind over the, versus the body and it's woven into all the work that I'm doing as well, from everything from yoga and yoga therapy and into human design and reminding ourselves to tune into our body and the awareness in our body. And we control the mind doesn't control us.
No.
And I think this is just another way to be able to share with people how they can remind themselves of that. And because they'll walk away from that masterclass. And then my goal with having that masterclass during that first week of the month was that then they have the whole month to reflect on this and maybe have some tools or resources or readings or things events that you have proposed throughout the year that they can tune into if they wanted to take a deeper dive into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I love that. I love the rhythm of your offerings. Excited to be a part of it.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to have you a part of it. Okay. So just as a final question here, what is most important to you right now in your world? What are you learning or most fascinated about, or what's kind of
Wow.
motivating and driving you day to day?
Yeah. I think what most fascinates me is the way that we as humans are being resourced by spirituality in ways that are remarkable, new, unfolding, and that I and others can actually develop a lifestyle where we are in more frequent conversation with this simple presence that is awake and aware of the sacred unfolding in the ordinary all around us all the time. And so I'm finding that fascinating. It's a practice. It's hopeful, and it is something I'm learning about every day. I don't at all feel I've mastered it. I still struggle with day-to-day stuff, but more and more I trust that there's something profound moving through the world and through us, and I want to channel that as much as I can.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the spiritual awareness and the day-to-day, that actually brings me full circle back to my spiritual direction meeting, which was my second thing that I was given as my homework, which was for me to use my senses and how I see the divine happening every single day.
Beautiful.
So yeah, as I go to bed every night, she suggested it as that kind of that time of day where you're just reflecting on the day and bringing it back to, where did I see the divine? Where did I see God today? Where did I see that being played out? Where did I see it, feel it, smell it, touch it, taste it? All the different ways that I can have that human experience and also have that giving myself in the present moment. And now as I think about that throughout my day, it does help ground me, because sometimes I'll think about it even throughout the day, like, okay, how have I seen this or felt this, or something will happen and I'll go, oh, that's my saw it, or felt it kind of moment. And it does definitely ground me. And I think that speaks to also what you're referencing here as well.
Yeah. The sacred is as close as our next breath. And we talk about breath work and because that brings us into the here and now, where we can awaken to the mystery that is profoundly for us. So,
yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much. So how do people find you, Scott? What is the best way to reach out to you if they're looking for a spiritual director, seeing what your offerings are?
yeah, so I have a couple different routes. Sojournersinstitute.com, which is a lot of words, sojournersinstitute.com, or my name, scott-mcrae.com.
Okay.
It's probably a simpler way. And I just I'm going to be completely redoing my websites. They're kind of a mess right now, but there's contact forms in both of those. I'd love to hear from people.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'll make sure everything's in the show notes so that people can easily access those websites that you're referencing. And do you have any offerings coming up that you want to mention as well, besides your Wise Year?
I'm actually semi-retired, so I'm kind of slowing down, but I'm deepening. I'm not taking on a lot right now. I'll just say that I'm primarily working with individuals, and one thing really where I'm putting my emphasis right now is consultation and supervision with spiritual directors and coaches and therapists who want to do more with spirituality in their practice.
Very nice.
But I'm also, if anybody's interested in training for spiritual direction, that's another piece that I'm offering and really putting a lot of focus on that.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your work in this world. This conversation has been a gift to me, and I know it'll be a gift to many others as well. So the way that you're able to hold space for people and having these deep conversations with the people that you're working with, but also taking it out into a broader audience so easily, and just being able to speak to it here on a podcast. And I'm just so grateful for you, again, for your warmth, for your curiosity, for all the work you're doing.
Thank you, Sara, and thank you for all of your work. We're definitely on a supportive path with each other, and you're doing some wonderful work. So thanks for including me.
Thank you so much. Friends, if today's conversation stirred something inside of you, if you found yourself thinking, I want more of this, here's what you can do. First, if you're not already a part of Your Wise Year, Scott's Masterclass, The Sacred Map of Clarity, is just one of the reasons to join. Your Wise Year is a year-long program I've developed featuring 11 remarkable coaches and guides, each one bringing a unique and transformative perspective to help you live with more wisdom, intention, and wholeness. Scott is one of those 11, and this masterclass gives you a taste of the depth that he brings. You can learn more about that at yourwiseselfwithsara.com/yourwiseyear. The link will, of course, be in the show notes as well. Also, if you'd like to explore Scott's work more, I'll include his contact information in the show notes as well. If this episode spoke to you, the best thing that you can do is share it with someone who needs to hear it. Screenshot it, text it to a friend, share in your stories. Your wise self always knows exactly who that person is. Make sure to subscribe to Your Wise Self with Sara wherever you listen to your podcast so that you never miss an episode. And if you're ready to go deeper with your own well-being, I'd love to support you. Come find me at yourwiseselfwithsara.com. Until next time, keep listening to that quiet, wise voice within. It knows the way.